Did our ancestors ever come into contact with extraterrestrial beings? That question may sound insane, but increasingly, it urges many to look back at the history of humanity with more skepticism and openness. Not in modern times, nor in the Middle Ages or ancient Greece, but over 5,000 years ago, in the land of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers gave rise to what is believed to be the first cradle of human civilization, Sumer. The ancient Sumerian civilization was not only a starting point, but also one of the greatest mysteries ever left by human history. Unlike civilizations that gradually developed over time, the Sumerians seem to have emerged suddenly with all the elements of an advanced society: writing, laws, architecture, astronomy, mathematics, and even a large scale city management system. They left behind tens of thousands of clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform, the earliest known writing system in history, containing not only life regulations, but also myths, histories, and knowledge far beyond the understanding of their time. Among those contents, one thing repeats like a cryptic reminder: all the knowledge, laws, and order the Sumerians possessed came from beings they called the Anunnaki. Literally, in Sumerian, Anunnaki means those who came down from the heavens. They were not vague gods symbolizing nature or emotions, but specific entities with names, ranks, complex relationships with one another, and most notably, a direct connection to human development. The Sumerians did not claim to have invented everything. They said the Anunnaki taught them how to build, how to observe the stars, how to write and calculate, even how to organize society and heal the sick. These beings lived in ziggurats, stepped temple structures similar to pyramids, and were sometimes described as arriving in fiery chariots in the sky, then leaving and promising to return in a future cycle. Under the eyes of modern scholars, the Anunnaki are often interpreted as a symbolic mythological system. But for those pursuing unorthodox research, particularly scholar Zecharia Sitchin, the descriptions of the Anunnaki are not mythology, but history. According to him, the Anunnaki were extraterrestrials from a distant planet called Nibiru, a celestial body orbiting the sun in a vast elliptical path, only coming near Earth every few thousand years. Sitchin's hypothesis asserts that the Anunnaki came to Earth seeking gold, a rare element needed for their planet's survival technology, and created humans by combining their own DNA with that of indigenous primates, producing a species capable of intelligent labor: modern humans. That hypothesis may sound insane, but the evidence left by the Sumerians makes it hard to dismiss. On an ancient seal named VA-243, one can find a depiction of the solar system with all the planets, including those invisible to the naked eye and only confirmed thousands of years later by modern astronomers. Sumerian astronomical tablets accurately describe the cycle of Venus, the position of Saturn, and even the moons of Jupiter. They used a base 60 numeral system, a mathematical system still used in how we divide time today, and illustrated the Pythagorean theorem nearly 1,000 years before Pythagoras was born. These achievements show no signs of trial and error, as if the Sumerians did not invent them, but were reconstructing something that once existed: a lost civilization or a knowledge system granted by another species. And so, the opening question, whether our ancestors ever contacted extraterrestrial beings, is no longer mere fiction, but a grounded suspicion. Because if the Sumerians accessed knowledge far beyond their time, more than 5,000 years ago, if they were guided by those who came down from the heavens, if mythology is actually encoded history, then our entire understanding of human origins, of historical progression, of the nature of knowledge, may be just a fragile veneer covering a far more overwhelming and astonishing truth. And perhaps it is the Sumerian civilization, with its mysterious Anunnaki, that holds the key to humanity's greatest secret: who we are, where we come from, and whether we were created for a purpose beyond imagination. Among the thousands of clay tablets left by the Sumerians, the term Anunnaki appears repeatedly. But what stands out lies in how they describe these beings, not with mystical praises or vague divine symbols, but with phrases of very tangible substance: those who came down from the heavens. That description, which may seem metaphorical, becomes a haunting clue when placed within the entire context of Sumerian culture. These people were not merely abstract deities. They had names, titles, specific duties. They lived in grand architectural structures, ziggurats, which the Sumerians built according to instructions from the heavens, and regularly traveled between sky and earth through radiant gates, or chariots of light. Some traditional scholars, notably Samuel Noah Kramer, one of the leading researchers on Sumerian civilization, view the Anunnaki as a symbolic mythological system. According to Kramer, the Anunnaki were a group of gods representing cosmic laws, natural order, and social life. They were not real in the physical sense, but personifications of cosmic knowledge in mythological language. This view, supported by years of archaeological and philological research, remains the dominant stance within academia. However, this scholarly steadfastness seems to overlook, or perhaps deliberately avoid, many overly specific details in the Sumerian texts that, if taken literally, would lead to an entirely different interpretation. And that is the interpretation put forth by Zecharia Sitchin, an ancient language researcher and author of the Earth Chronicles series, which shocked both the archaeological community and those seeking truths beyond the mainstream. According to Sitchin, the Sumerian descriptions were not symbolic, but factual accounts of an extraterrestrial species from a planet called Nibiru, a celestial body that moves in an extremely long elliptical orbit, entering the solar system only once every 3,600 years. During a visit hundreds of thousands of years ago, the inhabitants of Nibiru, the Anunnaki themselves, came to Earth in search of gold, an element they needed to reconstruct the deteriorating atmosphere of their home planet. But to mine gold from deep within the Earth, particularly in the African region, they needed a labor force. And thus, a decision was made that would alter the entire fate of Earth. The Anunnaki would create a hybrid species, half them, half Earthling, combining their DNA with that of indigenous primates to produce humans, a species with intelligence, capable of following orders and able to learn. According to descriptions in the texts Sitchin interpreted, this process was not merely mythical creation, but resembled a report of a genetic engineering program. Humanity, according to Sitchin's hypothesis, is an artificial project, a hybrid experiment created to serve a resource extraction purpose. Of course, this hypothesis faces fierce criticism from the academic community. Many argue that Sitchin misinterpreted the texts or imposed modern concepts onto ancient symbols. Yet those who have read excerpts from the Enuma Elish, the Sumerian creation epic, cannot help but shudder at details like the gods divided Earth into extraction zones, or humans were molded from clay and the blood of a slain god to serve the heavenly ones. Are these merely metaphors, or truths encoded in mythological language passed down to posterity? In the contrast between the two interpretations, one seeing the Anunnaki as symbols of cosmic order, the other as records of extraterrestrial contact, there is a striking commonality. The Anunnaki were not human. Whether deified or decoded as beings from another world, the Anunnaki clearly represent a superior intelligence with power, knowledge, and decisive influence on a turning point in human evolution. Therefore, questioning the origin and nature of the Anunnaki is not merely curiosity about an ancient myth, but a journey in search of our own true origins of humankind. While much of ancient humanity was still struggling with hunting and gathering, the Sumerians, over 5,000 years ago, had already recorded astonishing things. Sophisticated astronomical laws, accurate descriptions of the planets in the solar system, and mathematical concepts that the West would not rediscover until millennia later. The clay tablets and ancient seals they left behind are not just archaeological artifacts, but possibly clear evidence of something unimaginable, that the Sumerians somehow accessed knowledge beyond the capacity of a primitive civilization. One of the most controversial pieces of evidence is the engraving on an ancient seal labeled VA-243, housed in the Berlin Museum. On it appears what seems to be a simple image, a large figure seated, surrounded by smaller beings. But the most striking element is the symbol above, a large radiant circle surrounded by 11 orbiting celestial bodies, arranged very similarly to the structure of our known solar system. Even more remarkably, this includes planets invisible to the naked eye, such as Uranus, Neptune, and even Pluto. Planets only confirmed by modern science with telescopes from the 18th century onward. How could the Sumerians depict the solar system with such precision without modern observational tools? Or were they taught? Beyond VA 243, the Sumerians also left behind remarkably advanced astronomical records, such as the Venus tablet of Ammisaduqa, a detailed text recording the movement cycle of Venus, accurate to the day. This is an extraordinary feat considering the time it was written, thousands of years before the birth of Copernicus or Galileo. They also recorded descriptions of Saturn's rings and the moons of Jupiter, details we can confirm today only with telescopes and space probes. Could the Sumerians have observed these with the naked eye? Or were they perhaps handed down this information from another source of knowledge, one they called from the heavens? Beyond astronomy, Sumerian mathematics was also far ahead of its time. They used a base 60 numeral system, not only for calculations, but one that has endured to this day. Each hour has 60 minutes, each minute 60 seconds, a direct legacy of the ancient Sumerian number system. On the famous clay tablet YBC 7289, the Sumerians drew a square and calculated the length of its diagonal using the square root of the two sides, accurate to 5 decimal places. This is essentially the Pythagorean theorem, written down more than 1,000 years before Pythagoras was born. There are no signs of vague experimentation, but rather a complete, correct, and practical formula. These pieces of evidence, taken individually, may be dismissed as coincidence or brilliance ahead of its time, but when linked together, they raise a serious question. Did the Sumerians discover all of this on their own, or were they merely recording fragments of an ancient knowledge system that once existed, or was passed down to them by a force not of this earth? In history, knowledge rarely appears instantaneously. It is a process of accumulation, trial and error, correction, and improvement. But in the case of the Sumerians, we see no trace of such a process. We only see a complete result, and that may warrant rewriting the entire history of humanity. The emergence of the Sumerian civilization is so strange that even veteran archaeologists must admit it happened too quickly, too suddenly, and too completely. Around 3200 BCE, while most tribes across the world were still living scattered lives as nomadic hunters and gatherers, cities like Uruk, Eridu, Lagash, and Nippur suddenly rose in southern Mesopotamia, present-day Iraq, with all the hallmarks of an urban civilized society: public squares, temples, administrative buildings, residential areas, irrigation systems, trade, laws, and there was no clear transitional period. No traces of primitive settlements, no signs of rudimentary construction experiments, nor a prolonged process of knowledge evolution. Everything appeared as if it had been pre-planned, reconstructed from a ready-made blueprint, like a design that once existed, was forgotten, and now deliberately revived. At such a pace of development, the Sumerians do not resemble a primitive civilization discovering the world, but rather inheritors, survivors of a great upheaval, trying to rebuild a once glorious knowledge system. One of their signature architectural feats, and evidence of their complexity beyond the age, is the ziggurat. These were massive stepped structures, tens of meters high, built with baked bricks, layered like pyramids, with the top pointing straight to the sky. Modern archaeologists often describe ziggurats as temples, places where the Sumerians worshipped the Anunnaki gods. But is that all? The solid structure, precise astronomical alignment, spiral staircases ascending according to solar orientation, all suggest that these were not merely religious sites, but possibly multifunctional ancient devices. Many unorthodox scholars believe that ziggurats may have been astronomical observatories, where the Sumerians tracked the movements of celestial bodies. Some theories even suggest they were energy transmission reception stations, harnessing the Earth's magnetic field, or centers for storing and encoding ancient knowledge, akin to libraries, but in geometric symbolism and spatial structure rather than books or texts. With what the Sumerians recorded about planetary motion, about the laws of time, about gateways between heaven and earth, ziggurats may well have been components of a system connecting humans to beings from the sky. All of this evokes a deeply challenging image for mainstream history. The Sumerian civilization was not a beginning, but a resurgence, the result of an attempt to reestablish order after some cataclysmic event. Perhaps, somewhere in the distant past, there existed a global civilization, an Atlantis or Mu of some kind. And when the world collapsed, a group of people carrying the remaining knowledge sowed it in Mesopotamia to begin again. And Sumer, with its complete cities, astronomical architecture, and knowledge systems beyond its time, may be the clearest trace of a civilization officially forgotten by history. When examining more closely the origins of the Sumerian civilization, it becomes clear that it does not stand in isolation. On the contrary, Sumer appears to be a link in a complex network of ancient sites spread across the planet, all bearing strange signs, eerily similar, despite being separated by thousands of kilometers and millennia. The starting point of this chain may well be Göbekli Tepe, an archaeological site in Turkey, dated to around 9600 BCE, which is over 7,000 years before the emergence of Sumer. At Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists discovered massive T-shaped stone pillars weighing tens of tons, intricately carved with animals, abstract symbols, and notably, motifs that may be linked to astronomy. The layout of the stone circles appears to align with constellations and the movements of celestial bodies across the night sky. No one knows who built Göbekli Tepe, nor why such a complex structure was erected at a time when humanity, according to mainstream history, was still busy gathering food, hunting, and had no knowledge of construction techniques. Remarkably, many symbols at Göbekli Tepe bear uncanny resemblance to symbols found in Sumerian texts thousands of years later, from spirals and sacred birds to the Tree of Life. This coincidence does not end with Sumer and Göbekli Tepe. When we expand our view globally, an unusual pattern begins to emerge. The Giza pyramids in Egypt, Stonehenge in England, the underwater ruins of Yonaguni in Japan, the Teotihuacan pyramids in Mexico, and the megalithic structures in South America, like Pumapunku, all exhibit a strong correlation with astronomical phenomena. The vernal equinox, constellations such as Orion or the Pleiades, solar and lunar cycles. Even in locations halfway across the globe from each other, ancient people used the same types of symbolic motifs. Spirals, symbols of time or energy, trees of life, or winged creatures like birds or serpents, imagery also found in Sumerian culture to depict the Anunnaki and the Me, cosmic knowledge. From this, a bold hypothesis has been proposed by many alternative scholars. Could there have once existed a global knowledge network in prehistoric times, operated by an ancient civilization with cosmic understanding beyond its age, and what we now call independent civilizations are merely the surviving fragments after a global catastrophe? These sites, in terms of geography, nearly align with the so-called ley lines, hypothetical energy axes connecting Earth's most sacred locations. And each of these places, whether Egypt, Sumer, England, Japan, or Mesoamerica, contains heavy stone structures, precise astronomical knowledge, and similar esoteric symbolism, something that cannot simply be explained away as random coincidence. If this is true, then Sumer was not the origin point, but one of the centers chosen to preserve and continue the transmission of an ancient knowledge stream that once spanned the Earth. And what the Sumerians recorded, the Anunnaki, the Me tablets, the star-aligned temples, are evidence of a cosmic knowledge network that once existed, but was fragmented by time, by catastrophe, or by the deliberate forgetting of modern history. A haunting intersection among ancient civilizations across the world is the myth of a great flood, a deluge that swept away life, destroyed humanity, and left only a few survivors who carried with them memory and knowledge to rebuild the world. From the Epic of Gilgamesh of the Sumerians to the story of Noah in the Bible, the tale of Manu in Indian tradition, and the flood myths of the Maya, the Inca, ancient Chinese, and more. All recount the same narrative. The earth was once submerged by a catastrophic flood, heavens in chaos, gods enraged, and a handful of people, either chosen or by chance, escaped death by climbing aboard an ark, ascending a mountain, or retreating into caves. It cannot be coincidence. When the same motif appears in geographically and temporally separated cultures, it suggests a collective global memory encoded as mythology. Today, geologists have confirmed that around 10,800 BCE, the Earth experienced an extremely unusual geological event known as the Younger Dryas, a sudden cold period lasting hundreds of years after the Ice Age, followed by rapid warming that caused sea levels to rise and triggered massive global floods. This very event may have seeded the flood myths remembered by so many cultures. And the most important part lies with the survivors. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim, the man who survived the flood, was granted the secret of life and immortality by the gods. In Indian mythology, Manu, the first to escape the flood, was given new laws and order by the god Vishnu. In many other stories, these survivors carried something very special. Not just life, but knowledge, memories of the old world, the principles of how the universe works, astronomy, mathematics, architecture, energy, and cosmic ethics. In Sumerian culture, they called these things me, not merely tools or doctrines, but ancient codes of knowledge containing technology, laws, and even programs for running a complete society. Me was not openly taught. It was encoded within rituals, within the imagery of gods, in the structure of temples, and in myths that sounded like fairy tales. The Sumerians believed the me were a legacy of the Anunnaki, handed down to humans through selected bloodlines, secret orders, and priesthoods to preserve and transmit after the catastrophe. Thanks to the me, they were able to reconstruct society, build cities, measure the stars, forge laws, and reestablish a civilization from the ruins. If this line of reasoning is correct, then we, modern humans, are not the first civilization, but the result of a long cycle of restoration. And somewhere in those old myths, in the ancient legends we once dismissed as fantasy, may lie the encoded memory of a world that existed before a global cataclysm. A world where knowledge was not just in books, but embedded in rites, in symbols, in ancient stone structures, waiting to be deciphered. From the perspective of a modern person, mythology is often seen as nothing more than fantastical tales. Stories where gods control the weather, fall in love, rage with fury, and bless or punish humanity. But if we change our perspective, viewing mythology as encrypted technical blueprints, as ancient data files transmitted in metaphor, a completely different picture begins to emerge. A world where knowledge was encapsulated in symbolic narratives, passed down from generation to generation, surviving wars, cataclysms, and forgetfulness. In Sumerian mythology, there is a particularly notable text called Enki and the Order of the World. In it, Enki, the god regarded as supreme wisdom and the protector of humanity, divides the universe into orders, assigning powers and roles to various forces: earth, water, agriculture, medicine, writing, justice, and even beer. But what is more striking is how the myth details the steps of building a society, from digging irrigation canals, producing bricks from baked clay, to medicinal formulas and primitive legal codes. Nothing is vague. It is as specific as a post-flood civilization operating manual. At the center of all these myths is the concept of me, cosmic knowledge tablets bestowed by the gods upon humankind. The Sumerians did not see the me as mere objects or rituals, but as principles, ancestral technologies, capable of running an entire civilization. In the list of me are law, astronomy, language, mathematics, metallurgy, music, and even the art of warfare. In other words, me are compressed data files of knowledge, embedded in myth and symbol, and the one who receives the me is tasked with safeguarding and reactivating civilization after catastrophe. Strangely, this concept is not exclusive to Sumer. In Egyptian civilization, we find Thoth, the ibis-headed god, regarded as the messenger of the gods, deity of writing, mathematics, and medicine. Thoth is also said to have recorded cosmic laws in the Book of Thoth, a lost tome believed to contain all the secrets of the universe, granting godlike powers to anyone who reads it. In Mesoamerica, the Maya spoke of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, a deity who brought knowledge to mankind, teaching them agriculture, construction, and astronomical calculations down to the precise day. In ancient Indian culture, the heavenly teachers of the Vedas, such as the rishis and devas, were beings from higher realms who came to earth to transmit mantras, sacred sound vibrations that conveyed divine knowledge, allowing humans to comprehend the structure of the cosmos. All these figures, Enki, Thoth, Quetzalcoatl, the rishis, share a common trait. They are not gods in the religious sense, but bearers of knowledge from another dimension to humanity. Celestial messengers acting as post-catastrophe guides. They did not demand blind worship from humans, but taught them to understand, rebuild, and reconnect with a lost cosmic order. And mythology, beneath its mystical veil, is a coded system of ancient knowledge, designed to preserve the operational principles of a former world in case humanity once again loses everything. Although the Sumerians left behind tens of thousands of clay tablets recording their knowledge, mythology, and history, we have only scratched the tiny visible tip of that vast iceberg of knowledge. Experts estimate that only about 20% of Sumerian texts have been systematically deciphered and studied, while the rest remain in archives, museums, or have been forever buried, not by time, but by the chaos of modern history. One of the greatest losses was the Library of Nineveh, the greatest repository of knowledge from the Mesopotamian civilization, where thousands of carefully inscribed clay tablets were stored. When the Assyrian Empire collapsed, the library was burned, most of the tablets shattered and buried in ash. Only a small portion was excavated in the 19th century, and from that, humanity was introduced for the first time to names like Gilgamesh and Anunnaki. However, even the surviving tablets offer no guarantee of accurate interpretation. The Sumerian and Akkadian languages are extremely complex, requiring translators to master not just vocabulary, but also cultural context, religious symbolism, and the abstract expression styles of that era. And here arises a major obstacle: academic bias. For centuries, archaeologists and Western scholars have approached Sumerian texts with the assumption that ancient people could not have possessed advanced knowledge, and that all metaphysical narratives must be interpreted as pure religious myth. As a result, many passages were simplified, ignored, or mistranslated, especially those referring to chariots of light, beings from the sky, or detailed descriptions of astronomy and technology. Numerous independent scholars, when comparing original texts to academic translations, have uncovered strange discrepancies. Physical concepts replaced with religious metaphors, technical descriptions reinterpreted as spiritual symbols, depictions of technology dismissed as poetic allegory. These biases have obscured the possibility that the Sumerians were describing a different reality, a body of true knowledge, not mere imagination. And because of that, we may be missing the most vital keys to reinterpreting human history. Worse still, in modern times, wars and political instability in the Middle East, once the land of ancient Sumer, have led to the destruction of numerous ruins, museums, and archives. Many clay tablets have been stolen, shattered, or ended up on the black market, never to be properly studied. Ancient knowledge is being lost in the most literal sense, and within it may lie information that could radically change our understanding of history, of human origins, and of Earth's connection to beings from the sky. As long as we continue to view the past through a lens of arrogance and narrowness, true knowledge will remain buried, not by stone and earth, but by modern denial itself. Throughout history, humanity has witnessed the destruction of knowledge time and time again, not due to a lack of intellect, but because of catastrophe, war, arrogance, and forgetfulness. The story of the Sumerians is a prime example, a pioneering civilization possessing an immense system of knowledge, once illuminated the ancient Mesopotamian region, only to vanish, leaving almost no trace in human memory for thousands of years. It wasn't until the 19th century that modern humanity heard their voice again through broken clay tablets unearthed from the dust. And even now, the vast majority of Sumerian knowledge remains forgotten, lost, or quietly resting, undeciphered in archaeological archives. Yet that lesson still seems insufficient to awaken modern humanity. We live in an era where knowledge is digitized, stored on servers, in the cloud, in cold drives, seemingly safe, immortal. But imagine a global war, a solar geomagnetic event, or a collapse of the energy grid. Everything we store today could disappear in an instant. While the Sumerians etched their knowledge into baked clay that has lasted thousands of years underground, we entrust the intelligence of our entire species to fragile digital code. History is repeating itself, except this time the consequences may be far greater, because history, when viewed closely, is not a straight line of progress, but a series of repeating spirals. After every peak comes a fall. After every brilliant civilization, a dark age follows. And then there are always survivors, carrying memories, kindling knowledge, rebuilding from ashes. It's entirely possible that the Sumerians were such an effort, a group of descendants or chosen ones who carried the remnants of ancient wisdom, founding cities like Uruk and Eridu as restoration stations of a once fallen global civilization. The Me, tablets they spoke of, cosmic principles handed down by the Anunnaki, were not a beginning, but seeds preserved after the Great Flood, waiting to one day sprout again. If we don't learn from that lesson, then next time forgetfulness may leave nothing behind. The most precious things aren't in buildings, diamonds, or gold, but in knowledge, in the deep understanding of the universe, of ourselves, and of how to live in harmony with everything around us. But such knowledge does not last if not respected, protected, and passed on to the next generation. And if today we continue to dismiss the past, reject what doesn't fit within familiar frameworks, and allow true knowledge to remain buried beneath prejudice, then perhaps one day our descendants too will have to start over, just like the Sumerians once did. In ruins, asking the same aching question, we used to know more than this, didn't we? The history we're taught in school may be merely a simplified version, perhaps even distorted by the limits of understanding, biases, and the interests of each era. But the past does not only reside in textbooks. It lies deep beneath the earth, on unread clay tablets, in dismissed legends, and in ancient ruins waiting to be re-examined with a new perspective. It is time for us to ask anew, do we truly know our origins? Are modern humans really the pinnacle of evolution, or merely a repeating cycle, inheriting the remnants of a prehistoric civilization erased by time? Let doubt become the fuel for discovery. Sites like Yonaguni, the submerged architectural complex off Japan's coast with step-like formations and sharply cut corridors, still have no official explanation. The Vedic technology of ancient India, with texts describing flying crafts, vibrational energy, and advanced medical knowledge, is still dismissed as myth, even as its scientific accuracy becomes increasingly apparent. And all across the Earth, memory markers, like pyramids, ancient stone astronomical alignments, and identical symbolic carvings, are quietly retelling a far greater story than official history has ever acknowledged. The journey to uncover truth about the past is not only for archaeologists or historians. It is the right and responsibility of all of us, modern people living in an age of technology, but at risk of losing connection to the roots of real knowledge. Knowledge, ancient or modern, is the most precious inheritance humanity possesses. It is not just a tool for survival, but a map to guide us through turbulent times. But this inheritance only becomes meaningful when placed in the hands of those who dare to ask questions, to doubt, to push beyond the limits of what we are allowed to believe. So if you've listened this far, don't let the story end at curiosity. Keep exploring. Connect the scattered dots, reread what was once dismissed, and open doors that history has long closed. Because perhaps in that forgotten past, we will find ourselves and find the future as well.